Well, hi, everybody. I'm Ned Engelke with EVOTEK, and I'm here to kick off the tomorrow's data center track. Today, we have Intel providing context on what everybody should be doing inside of their data centers, and then some younger companies that are involved in building the things that we do inside of the data centers. And the track from the startup companies is all around how you manage and construct infrastructure for next generation workloads. It's about how to take and monetize the data that we've accumulated, and then how to target and track and accumulate data appropriately from within your data center and the associated things. So Phil, over to you. Can't wait to hear what you guys are up to.
Thanks, Ned, and much appreciated. And I also want to thank the EVOTEK team for giving us the chance to talk with all of you guys today. First of all, let me introduce also Jodi Swanson. Jodi runs marketing inside Intel DSG, and she's going to be the one that's keeping me honest, asking me the questions. We'll do this as a bit of a fireside chat today without the fire, because I'm in Toronto, Canada, where it should be sub-zero temperatures, and I could be sunbathing outside right now. So there's that going on. But I just want to explain who we are. Intel, as most of you know, is this huge, as Ned said, we're a storied company, and DSG is a very unique part of Intel. We're the group that really assembles in not just reference, but commercially available systems that we make available to the entire ecosystem. And partnering with EVOTEK as a way of understanding how we can really shape the future of the data center is our challenge and our job. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about some of the ideas we have and hopefully answer your questions towards the end.
Sounds good.
So Jodi, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. So I know you're as excited to be here as I am. So let's go ahead and get started. First up, let's talk a little bit about, when you think about the future of the data center, what comes to the top of your mind, and what do you think should be at the top of mind for our viewers today?
It's funny, when we were talking about doing this session and we were thinking about the thematic behind it, the thing that came to my mind was, let's get real about the data center. And I say that not just to be provocative, but it is a little bit of a provocative statement. But the reality is what do we mean by the data center anymore? I think it's almost got to the point now where we need to redefine our context. And I think the context is key here. IDC recently came out, and your mileage will vary depending on who you are and your industry and your implementation and your services. But IDC came out and basically said, look, by 2025, so basically 10 years after where we were going to be when Back to the Future went into the future. So that will age some of us, I'm sure. By 2025, a third of the workloads will be in the public cloud as we understand it today. A third of the workloads will be in the traditional on-prem data center, and about a third will be in the edge. And the edge has become this interesting, fungible description of this intersection between methods of delivering services and capabilities and infrastructure. But if we think about that, so the data center now is no longer a building that has floor tiles and HVAC and racks. It is that, but moreover, it's a design and operational methodology around how we adequately provide the capabilities. Adequate sounds like a weird word to use, but I'll get back to that in a second. The right services we need for our organization. And the design, the domain design principles around that are no longer as static as they have been. And when I think about the data center, it's about the fungibility of where we can deploy services, how we deploy services, that has to fit towards an outcome, as opposed to here are the kind of the Lego building blocks that we have available, t-shirt size servers, storage arrays, infrastructure models. How do we think about that as our starting point, but the outcome we're trying to accomplish and how that will evolve? So I really think the data center we have to change our point of context. And I think that requires us to rethink how we design systems, how we implement systems, how the commercial models. This isn't a technology problem. Remember, AWS for the first 8-10 years of its existence didn't really use different technology, but they changed the business model. They changed the support model. They changed the operational model. And so we need to learn a lot from that, I think.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about AWS changing the business model and some of these others that are changing the business model. So what do people need to think about when they're thinking about how they keep up with all of these changes? Like what's coming up that they need to be aware of?
Well, the first thing that I really think about is all of us being where we are right now, which is Ned in his now revamped pool house, which is now his home office, and me in my basement, and Jodi in Montana. And I think about all of us and how we work, and the workplace is now, and we're not going to snap back. So COVID over the last, hey guys, it's 10 years now, 2 years rather, that we've been dealing with COVID one way or another. We are now going to be working in a much more distributed environment, which means that the way we think about the acquisition of talent and the use of talent and the optimization of talent, I heard some of the guys in the VC session earlier talking a little bit about this towards the end, I think will be critical. And I think it will be a lot more around federations of knowledge and federations of capability that we start leveraging. There's another thing that's been really interesting, and that's the supply chain issues that we've been all dealing with for the last year. And quite frankly, I don't see abating anytime soon. And the reason for this is the second most abundant substance on the planet, silicon, oxygen being number one, silicon being number two. You mix those together, you can form integrated circuits and really interesting technology. What we've realized is even with the second most abundant supply of materials on the planet, we have a capacity in the industry about how much we can actually translate that into technology. Now that's going to grow, and that's going to grow, but the infrastructure, and Intel's putting billions of dollars into this, as many others are as well. But in the meantime, we have to be much more judicious about how we think about the implementation of technology, because time to market, time to value, and the ability to recognize value out of our investments. And I'm going to look at this from your perspective, the guys listening to this session. When you're thinking about the investments you're making, how do you make sure you're balancing the agility you're looking for and the predictability in a very volatile market? And to do that, we have to, again, rethink how we not only build our systems, deploy our systems, but operate and commercially transact in terms of the acquisition models. And this will become key to this. I believe up to now, we've lived in the mainframe world, the client server world, the edge world, and cloud. And now we're kind of in this, what I call fungible world, as I've described before. And why I used the term adequate before isn't because I'm looking for lowest common denominator. I'm looking to make sure that as we deploy services, we're thinking about what is the minimum viable platform we require for that, and then build upon that to our levels of resilience, high availability, security, policy, on top of that MVP, if you like, that minimum viable platform, be it in the cloud, in the edge, or on-prem. All three are viable, but we need to think about it from an outcome perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely makes sense. That's a lot to think about. Lots of current challenges that we're facing today. So we've talked a little bit about that, and I'm curious, like what, going a little bit deeper about emerging technologies. Like you mentioned the edge, and you mentioned a couple of the others, but what specifically do we need to think about incorporating into our future plans when it comes to those emerging technologies?
You know, if we were all getting on planes as regularly as we used to, all fighting to get our next elite flight status on whichever airline was our choice of flight, we'd be reading back to magazines that would be telling us about these generic terms like AI and machine learning, and they're really important things, guys. But the reality is, what does it mean? Why are we thinking about this? We're thinking about this because the amount of data we have to process and make decisions on is growing to the point where the unstructured data sets, that we've been talking about this for a few years now, outweigh the structured data sets by about 1,000 to 1. Now, 10 years ago, it was about 10 to 1. So we've gone 2 orders of magnitude in about 10 years, and that's not going to slow down. So the reality is, how do we start thinking about how, depending on our vertical market, how do we start using data more effectively as well as more efficiently? We've been focused on the efficiency up to now. Now we're going to look at the effectiveness. And that's why the edge becomes an important part of this, and how we can think about structuring the acquisition and processing, translation, and use of data. And I think this comes down to, quite honestly, understanding when to build specialized systems and when to build more generalized systems. And that will allow us to get to what I really believe is important, is the modularity. That means we don't build custom systems for specific workloads because they would change too rapidly. We think about an operational model that allows us to be more late binding. Currently, our point of effectiveness is the point of acquisition and purchase. We've got to get to that to be the point of operation, where we can assemble either from the public cloud, the edge, or the private cloud, the necessary resources as our workloads evolve. There's about 13 well-defined application design models. Question is, in 10 years, is that likely to look like 20 or look like 200? the chances are it'll be more like 200, and we have to figure out how we can build infrastructure that meets those demands.
Okay, so we've just keeping track of time. We've got about time for 2 more questions and short answers from you, Phil. So second to last question, you mentioned different types of data centers and kind of the appropriateness for certain types of applications and workloads. So it's not a one size fits all anymore, which we absolutely understand. So what are some of the primary considerations when you're choosing, and how to better prepare for data center transformation?
There's a gentleman by the name of Adrian Cockcroft that maybe some of you are familiar with. He spent a lot of time at IBM and Netflix and Google and many other places. And Adrian was one of the guys who really kicked off the whole microservices architectural model, which is the, if you like, the new foundation. We think about virtualization and containers and cloud native. Actually, if you think about microservices, it works on the premise that you can assemble components as you need to at an application and service layer. And that will allow you. So we need to engineer and design our entire operational model, I keep using that phrase, to allow us to take full advantage. Now, I think the important thing here is security, and there's another track on security, and our partners here at EVOTEK, this is why partnering with people like EVOTEK is so critical, because they see it from not just the technology and the platform transformation, but the operational transformation, security, policy, orchestration, the areas that really fundamentally change the way we think about this. So, but I really think about, don't just worry about the boxes that my guys build or other guys build. Think about your ecosystem and the partner ecosystem that will really help you on that journey, not just on a project by project basis, but more holistically.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll turn it over to Ned for some Q&A. So let's just kind of summarize top 2 or 3 things that you want people to take away from this. So when they turn this off and they're thinking about it tonight, having that conversation over dinner, what do you want everyone to remember about this conversation and what they need to think about for the future of the data center?
It'll sound trite, but the change we're going through right now is by no means a sort of even a step function. This is just approaching a step function in change we're about to hit. And we're about to do that because, quite frankly, as I said, we're about to get into a world where there'll be government policy applied to privacy. We're seeing that happening right now in North America. We're going to see that in Europe. We're going to see that in other parts of the world. We're going to see how data becomes a source of monetization as well as just of processing. But the one thing I'd ask all of you to think about is go back and ask, if you're a CIO, ask your business leaders, what problems do they need to go solve for the business? And make sure that you're at the beginning of that conversation, not the end of it. So you can really understand how you can build infrastructure and service platform models that really look at how to get ahead of the problem, as opposed to trying to, quite frankly, do what we've all done. I've been a CIO, I've been a systems administrator, I've done about every job, including the vacuum cleaner that unplugged the rest of the servers. Think about how we get ahead of the problems, working with your ecosystem.
So we will hold questions until the end because we're about to switch into a different presenter, but I wanted to just pull out something, Phil, that you mentioned that are near and dear to my heart. And it's almost all I think about when I work with customers, when the word you used was outcomes. So we're all doing this, all the architecture and sorting through technologies and selecting options because we're serving our customers as they try to achieve whatever their objectives are. And the biggest challenge is identifying those objectives so that we can then match the technologies to it. The other word that you use that I think about a lot is holistic. These are we never solve anything by, you don't build a tent by just sticking up a pole. It requires all kinds of other stuff. And so I think it's really important. It's a very hard discipline to take on board. And I appreciate you raising those during your presentation. Thank you for your partnership and for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Ned. And thanks to all the team at EVOTEK. Much appreciated.